Previously on Loophole City, Nashville learned its blueprint for city building. When the law stands in the way, find a way around it. We traced two loopholes that set the stage for everything that followed, routing I-40 through Jefferson Street and consolidating the urban core with the suburbs into Metro Nashville. Now the machine is built, and the question becomes, who learns to use it? Because in episode 2, it's the developer's turn. This is Loophole City, the secret history of Nashville's tall-and-skinnies. September 2001. In an office a few blocks from the Capitol, Tennessee's Attorney General sits behind a cluttered desk and signs his name to a 3-page opinion he assumes few will ever read. His name is Paul Summers. The question in front of him sounds painfully boring. If a developer wants to use something called the Horizontal Property Act, a law that was written in 1960s for condos, does that count as subdivision? In other words, if you split ownership on a lot, do you have to go through the whole subdivision process? Planning commission meetings, plats, public notices, neighbors with opinions? Or can we just skip all of that? Summers reads the statute, considers the question, and writes his answer. It's short, and it's exactly what developers want to hear. No. He said establishing a horizontal property regime does not create subdivision. On the zoning map, the lot stays whole. On the ground, 2 homes can rise where one once stood, and be sold separately. No subdivision, no planning commission, no public hearings. Summers signs the opinion, sends it out, and moves on to the next file in his stack. He doesn't know it yet, but that quiet moment at his desk will echo through Green Hills, the Nations, East Nashville, and almost every in-town neighborhood in Nashville. It will redraw skylines on side streets. It will turn brick ranches into a pair of 3-story tall-and-skinnies that define what Nashville looks like today. And if you've ever driven past 2 narrow houses squeezed onto a single lot and thought, how did we get here? This is part of the answer. Today we follow that question across decades of city history, through the side streets, the council chambers, and a few crafty legal loopholes that sparked one of the largest infill movements in the country. I call it Loophole City. Let's rewind. It's the 1970s. Nashville is changing. I-40 has just torn through Jefferson Street, and Metro has consolidated the city with the outer county. 2 massive loopholes that we covered in episode 1 that laid the groundwork for everything that follows. Downtown enters what planners call the era of stagnation. For the first time in U.S. history, city leaders had to plan for 2 places at once, the city and the county outside of it. The Metro government sat around tables with maps spread wide, trying to answer a question they've never had to ask before. How do you plan for a city and everywhere around it? The answer came in 1974, a new rulebook called COMZO, the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. 1 map, 1 code. Sounds simple, but it was actually a blueprint for suburban sprawl. COMZO split the city into tight zones. You had commercial strips, industrial areas, agricultural zones, and residential districts labeled R. Most of Nashville got R zoning, which meant 1 or 2 units maximum per lot. If you've ever noticed how Nashville's lots are narrow and impossibly deep, like a shoebox, that's COMZO. The code mandated it. Big lots, deep setbacks. Historic neighborhoods that had been walkable, mixed-use areas suddenly had the design recipe for suburban sprawl baked in, because the city had to zone everything like it was a suburb. Meanwhile, nationally, other cities were building differently. In the 1960s and 70s, federal mortgage law had shifted. New buildings started stacking upward, condos. In places like Honolulu, D.C., Atlanta, there was vertical density. But Nashville stayed low-rise, and demand slumped downtown. COMZO restricted multifamily housing. Most new homes rose in the far fringes, in the suburbs, spreading out, not up. And Nashville hit pause. But hidden in the pause is the most important legal document in Nashville's recent history. In 1963, Tennessee passed the Horizontal Property Act, the HPA. It wasn't written for tall-and-skinnies. It wasn't written for Nashville. It was written for a very normal 1960s problem. How do you make condos legal? So the law created a framework for condominiums, separately owned units in a shared structure, which shared common elements like roofs, walls, hallways, and the land underneath. The HPA did something subtle but powerful. It said you could carve a building into separately owned pieces without carving the dirt underneath. Legally, you had multiple saleable units sitting on top of one tract of land. On paper, it reads like a technicality, but in real life, it's a lever. You can multiply the number of front doors on a lot without redrawing the lot lines. And for 27 years, nobody cared. Because in those decades, urban demand was basically asleep. The money was out in the suburbs. The political fights were out in the suburbs. The HPA sat on a shelf, valid, available, and boring. Then 1990 showed up. The legislator amended the HPA. Nothing cinematic, no ribbon cutting, just edits. But here's what matters conceptually. The amendments make it clearer how you turn the key. If you record the right paperwork, basically a map of what's being divided and a rule book for how it works, then the property flips into a new mode of ownership. A horizontal property regime. Developers called it an HPR. An HPR is lawyer speak for a simple idea. There's one property with multiple owners because the paperwork says so. The 1990 amendment also sharpened the definitions in a way that makes it seem innocent until you stare at it long enough. The law starts talking about private elements, the part that belongs to one unit. Not just your condo, your whole slice, the footprint of the land and the structure sitting on it. And more importantly, it defines a unit, an apartment, broadly enough to include something that doesn't really feel like a condo at all. A unit could be a freestanding building, plus a clearly drawn patch of open space next to it. Put these together and you get a very different creature than the classic stacked condos that were getting built in the 60s and 70s. Because now, in the right hands, the law doesn't just describe a tower downtown. It describes a neighborhood lot. Suddenly, you can build what looks like two separate houses side by side on one parcel. And on paper, each one is just a unit inside of an HPR. As long as the boundaries and the rules are filed correctly. Each one can be sold like its own thing. Its own deed, its own buyer, its own mortgage, its own tax bill. But underneath all of that, the deeds, the loans, Metro still sees one tract of land. One zoning lot, one subdivision. And that's where the loophole lives. And the mechanism was sitting there, fully assembled. The city just hadn't tripped over it yet. Because the loophole alone wasn't enough. Developers had the keys, legal permission to turn one lot into two saleable homes without ever splitting the land. But the keys meant nothing if nobody wants what you're building. Downtown Nashville had a demand problem. It's 1991. The Ryman is dormant. Lower Broadway is mostly pawn shops and adult bookstores. Downtown is a 9-to-5 canyon. People came for work and then left. No one wanted to live there. Then, a businessman from New York decided to run for mayor. He's a Harvard grad who just sold an insurance company to Primerica for $400 million. He ran on a simple platform: competence, fix schools, clean up City Hall, make smart investments. His name was Phil Bredesen. And he had a bolder idea about downtown. Bredesen believed that the core could come alive again, but only if he gave people reasons to be there at night. Not work, not errands, but entertainment. So he bet on an arena. Not just any arena, an arena that would face Broadway, would anchor the district, and would pull people back into the core after dark. A place where you could hear live music, not silence. Today, you know it as Bridgestone Arena. The Ryman would be preserved, the streetscape would be cleaned, but the arena would be the real move. The thing that fundamentally changed what downtown meant. Years later, Bredesen reflected on this decision. He was interviewed by the Tennessean, and he put it bluntly. Remember Nashville in 1991? You could have gone out in the middle of 2nd Avenue and set a bomb off, and no one would have heard. That arena was always designed to be the anchor around which we were going to rebuild the downtown environment. Music and entertainment were going to be the real anchor. You would have a place that would accommodate sports, but if you want to have a big music concert, you have to go downtown. End quote. What Bredesen understood was something that looked simple but was actually revolutionary. If you create nightly reasons to be downtown, live music, sports, events, developers could underwrite housing nearby because the risk profile changed. A developer could now build housing near an arena, which meant buyer traffic, which meant sales, which meant projects made financial sense. The narrative came first. The economics followed. You would have to go downtown to hear great music. Suddenly, people wanted to live near that experience. They wanted to be close to Broadway. They wanted to walk to the Ryman. This was the missing ingredient. And then in 2001, Tennessee Attorney General Paul Summers, the same man we met at the top of the episode, gets a very specific, clarifying question. If a property owner wants to use the Horizontal Property Act to create one of these HPRs, does that count as subdivision that has to go through Regional Planning Commission? His written answer is only a few pages long, but the key line is blunt. The establishment of a horizontal property regime does not constitute a subdivision of property. If a developer follows the steps in the statute, records the master deed, lease, or plat with the required particulars, they do not have to get subdivision approval from the commission. Summers adds one caveat. This doesn't waive zoning. You still need a building permit. You still have to meet height and setback and use rules. But on the one choke point where neighbors actually have leverage, the subdivision process, the public hearings, the state's top lawyer said, not if it's an HPR. At that point, the pieces were all on the table. A 1963 condo law that lets you put multiple front doors on a lot without cutting a lot in half. A 1990s mayor who turns downtown into an entertainment engine people actually want to live near. And a 2001 opinion from an attorney general that turns a clever reading into an official state doctrine. Developers now had two things they've never had at the same time in Nashville: legal keys in hand and demand in the market. The rest happened fast. If you want to understand how the loophole evolved, all you need to do is walk through Nashville. The city is a museum. Each neighborhood is an exhibit. And if you know what you're looking for, you can see exactly how developers refined the HPR loophole over 20 years, block by block, era by era. It didn't start with the tall, narrow homes you see everywhere today. It started with something bigger, bolder. And when Metro or neighbors tried to stunt the growth, developers found new ways around the rules. There's 4 eras, 4 variations of the same loophole. Let me take you through the exhibit. Our first stop is pre-2008, and Green Hills is the lab. The lots were large, 10,000 square feet, post-war ranches, deep backyards. The neighborhood was desirable, near Vanderbilt, near Belmont, near the mall at Green Hills, with strong schools. And the HPR law had just unlocked a legal path to double density. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a developer, because the trick wasn't design, it was arithmetic. You could understand why they chose this route. In early 2000s Green Hills, you could buy an ordinary ranch for the mid to high $200,000 range. Then you'd do something that felt violent but made perfect sense on paper. You'd knock it down. Then you'd build 2 tall, modern homes. Let's call them 2,500 square feet. For construction costs in that era, it was about $75 a square foot to build. If you add in the cost of the land and your construction, Your total investment would be about $625,000 to build 2 new homes, which meant the bet wasn't, can I build a great house? The bet was, how quickly can I turn one door into 2? But there was a catch. Metro's code said that the 2 homes had to be attached in any way. So developers built what locals used to call a Siamese mansion. There were 2 large houses, side by side, connected by a tiny storage room or hallway that was tucked in the back. Just enough to satisfy the rule. From the street, they looked like 2 completely separate houses. But technically, they were one structure, one parcel, one HPR. Landscaping even hid the connector. Buyers didn't care. Once the first of these sold, lenders and real estate agents had comps, then floor plans, then crews. A flywheel of repeatable plans and deals kicked in, and the model spread. In 2005 alone, 96 HPR units were delivered. Median size was nearly 3,000 square feet. A quarter of them were 3,750 square feet. The neighbors revolted. Just imagine you live in a 3,000 square foot house on a 10,000 square foot lot. And across the street, 2 houses appear, each the same size as yours, but 3 stories tall, towering over your yard. And the teardowns were random. They were lot by lot, not block by block. No coordination, no planning, just whoever sold first got replaced with 2 massive homes. Neighbors pushed back. They petitioned the city. And by the mid-2000s, pieces of Green Hills started to downzone to become only single family, no HPRs. The goal was simple. It was to preserve the neighborhood's character and make 2-for-1 play a lot harder. And Green Hills wasn't alone. Other neighborhoods had already started installing these guardrails, sometimes not by downzoning, but adopting some sort of overlay that forces design review. As an example, Lockland Springs had a neighborhood conservation overlay, going all the way back to September of 1985. Sylvan Park followed with its own neighborhood conservation overlay in 2006. By the late 2000s, the message was clear. The loophole was real, but some neighborhoods were racing to narrow the doorway before the wave got even bigger. Developers were essentially forced out of Green Hills if they wanted to build HPRs. So they had to find their next target and begin a new era. And developers found a neighborhood with low cinder block houses and modest post-war cottages. Tight lots just north of Charlotte Pike. Locals and reporters were still calling it a working-class pocket, the kind of place you passed on the way to somewhere else. But today, you know it as the Nations. Developers saw the potential. Land was cheap, much cheaper than it was in Green Hills. There was no organized neighborhood resistance yet. The problem was that the lots were small, typically 50 feet wide, not 100 feet like they had in Green Hills. So the lots were too small for the Green Hills model. You couldn't build 2 massive homes with a tiny connector in between and still meet the setback requirements. There wasn't enough space. So developers adapted. Instead of 2 homes connected by a hallway or a storage shed in the back, they built 2 homes that shared a wall along the entire side, like row houses, like twins. The homes were narrow, 16 to 17 feet wide, but stretched deep, 70 to 80 feet, 3 stories tall, maximizing every inch of the lot. This was the birth of the tall and skinny. The connector wasn't a storage shed anymore. It was an entire shared wall to fit the lot. Then in 2014, Metro rewrote the HPR code once again, and we entered our 3rd era. The change was small, but it was the final piece that developers needed. Metro legalized what existed in spirit all along. A perfect oxymoron. The detached duplex. 2 fully separate homes on one parcel. No connector, no shared wall, no subdivision required. The loophole was now complete. Developers could build 2 freestanding homes, sell them separately, and avoid subdivision entirely. And the floodgates opened. Tear down an old cottage, build 2 freestanding homes, sell them separately, repeat. Post 2014, the model spread all across Nashville. If you drive through the Nations and other neighborhoods like Cleveland Park or Wedgwood, Houston today, you can see the pattern. 2 homes side by side, carbon copies. And developers no longer needed to attach the homes or hide connectors. They could build these 2 homes as long as they filed the correct paperwork. So the homes got taller, narrower, deeper. Sometimes developers got cute and painted one black and the other one white. Lots that used to hold 1 modest cottage now held 2 3-story homes with almost no yard. Maximum square footage, maximum sales price. And the prices continued to rise. The loophole kept working. Then COVID hit. Interest rates dropped to near zero. Demand for housing surged. Land prices skyrocketed. Remote work made urban living even more desirable. Developers couldn't build fast enough. And as land prices climbed, the only way to maintain profit margins was to build bigger and sell for higher prices. More square footage per lot, wider footprint. The tall and skinny became a tall and fatty. Homes filled entire lots. Some developers went back to the attached builds just to maximize the box. Others placed 1 home in the front and 1 in the back, a front and back pairing instead of side by side. The loophole kept adapting. From 2010 to 2023, over 20,000 HPR units were built across Nashville. 20,000. That's the scale of what one sentence, tucked into a forgotten 1963 law and clarified in 2001, enabled. The loophole didn't break the system. The loophole was the system. And that brings us to today, the end of our exhibit, for now. Because the museum isn't finished. It's still being built. And the power is shifting. So here's what happened. In 2001, an attorney general's opinion clarified a 1963 law. Developers read it carefully, they saw a gap, and they built through it. For the next 2 decades, they refined that gap. They adapted when there was pushback, and they evolved the model as demand changed. And over that span, tens of thousands of homes were built using variations of the same loophole. But this story isn't about bad actors. It's not about greedy developers or incompetent planners. It's not about a system that failed. The system rewarded those who read the law carefully. It rewarded those who saw gaps before anyone else, and it rewarded those who could adapt faster than the rules could be rewritten. That's not a flaw. That's how the system works. And once you understand how the system works, how loopholes operate, how incentives align, you can start asking yourself different questions. You can ask, what did we gain? Nashville got housing. For 30 years, while other cities struggled with underdevelopment, Nashville built. Young professionals could buy homes in downtown neighborhoods at affordable prices. Families could move into the city instead of sprawling out into the suburbs. The city core came alive again. Neighborhoods changed, and change meant growth, investment, possibility. But you can also ask, what did we lose? Neighborhoods changed fast, sometimes too fast. Historic character disappeared. Streetscapes transformed overnight. Speculation became more profitable than stewardship. Affordability gains were real, but so were displacement pressures on lower-income residents. Tree canopy was cut. Parking became chaotic. Infrastructure struggled to keep pace. Both are true. The system created and destroyed simultaneously. That is where we have to sit in the discomfort. We want to say that HPRs were good for Nashville or HPRs destroyed Nashville. But the honest answer is more complicated. It's both. They created opportunities and problems. They created wealth and displacement. They densified neighborhoods and disrupted communities. They filled a need and created others. But here's the problem that we're living with right now. The very product that started as affordable has drifted out of reach for the people it was once helping. The first wave of HPRs sold for comparable prices to the old bungalows that they replaced. Today, on those same streets, the dirt alone can be worth what an entire house once cost. The tall and skinny, that used to be a starter home for a teacher or a nurse, is now a move-up home for somebody bringing equity from somewhere else. The loophole is still working. The pro forma is still penciled. The buildings keep getting built, but the target buyer has changed. The workaround that once opened the door for first-time buyers in close-in neighborhoods is now, in most cases, a product priced for people who were never locked out to begin with. The system is still humming, but it's no longer solving the original problem. Understanding this isn't about taking sides, it's about seeing it clearly. Because we're not merely stuck with the result of this loophole. We're not trapped by our past decisions. You need to understand how we got here before you can decide where we want to go. Episode 3 is about what comes next. It's about asking, what do the 20,000 buildings tell us about what Nashville is becoming? What do they tell us about whose voices gets heard and whose don't? What parts of the boom do we need to keep accelerating? What parts do we need to slow down? Who do we want to serve? It's about power. Because that's what loopholes really are. They're moments when power shifts from the government to the market, from old rules to new ones, from one neighborhood to another. And once you see how power shifts through loopholes, you stop being a passive observer of how your city changes, and you start asking, why did they do it that way? What gap are they exploiting? Who benefits from the rules? Who loses? And once you are asking those questions, you have agency. You can look at an HPR and say, this loophole did something. It solved a problem and it created others. What do we do now? Episode 1 showed you how loopholes work through procedure, how the state used process as a weapon and built a blueprint. Episode 2 showed you how the private market adapted, how one sentence can reshape a city, how buildings can emerge from a single loophole. And episode 3 will show you what it means for Nashville, for the neighborhoods that boomed and the ones that didn't, for the people who benefited and the ones who were displaced, for what the city has become and what it might become next. And most importantly, it will show you where we can go from here. Because understanding how loopholes work isn't academic, it's practical. It's about choice. Nashville didn't have to evolve this way. But given the laws, the incentives, and the players involved, it did. You're a participant in what happens next. This is Loophole City, and you live in it. Now you know how it works. Let's talk about what to do about it. I'll see you for episode 3.